right? Because we don't have the fifth makan or fifth space here. Uh, for I is equal to 5. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 because we know that array starts with 0. Okay, so these things we discussed this. So array's index out of bound exception will be thrown, right? And then we have seen this example also. So remember that whenever you have like division, make sure the denominator here, it should not be 0, right? Because if it is a 0, it's an exception in mathematics and your program will crash, right? So actually when your program is crashing, so this is like a situation which we don't want, right? Embarrassment kind of situation. My program is running, for some data it is giving me correct result, but for some data it is crashing. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to terminate the program gracefully. So that's what we are trying to understand here. So using exception handling, what we do, either we, if we, see the thing is like when you got an exception, in some cases you will have an option to continue. In some cases you will not have an option to continue. Okay, so depend on the type of exception you are getting it. As I have given you the example, when we are reading the data from a database or from a file, now if the database is off, if the file is not there, what your program can do? Nothing, right? So under those situations, you have to just give a message and gracefully exit. You understand the point? But in some cases, suppose you are asking user to enter the data, you are asking him to enter integer, he entered anything else. So for those cases, we can continue because we can let the user enter again. Okay, so that's the important thing. So gracefully terminate or keep running it depends on the type of exception occurred and whether you can continue or not. So that also basically plays an important role. Okay, so exceptions handling give us another opportunity to recover from the abnormality. So we can recover it using the exception handling, right? So either we can recover it, or at least we can gracefully terminate. At least we can just give a message to the user and we close our program. So that's what we do with the exception handling. Okay, so we have discussed this, so I think you know this all. So let's try to go through the topics what we have not covered. So any question if you have. So what we have understand that exception can be generated by your program, depend on different situation, depend on different data that you are receiving it, or some resources you are reading it. So because of those resources, because of some calculation, because of some inputs, your program might terminate, okay, abnormally. So we have to make sure we basically deal with these kinds of errors that appears in my program when it is running. So we have also discussed the throw and the throws, if you remember. What is the difference between throw and the throws? Yes, sir. We discussed this in the last class. The throw, T-H-R-O-W, and the throws, T-H-R-O-W-S.
The throws is exception maybe exist in this method, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And throws to throw it to the who's calling.
Okay, very good. So when we write our method, what we do, we use THROWS with W and S. So this THROWS we use to basically declare a method. Let me just, because this here, yes. So what we are doing here? So we are saying that this method will throw exception. So this is your general exception, right? So exception is the father of all the exception, right? Superclass of all the exception. So when we say throws with S, so basically we are saying that this method there are possibility that this method will throw an exception. Where it will throw, of course, it will throw to the one who is calling this method. And this throw is basically you are generating an exception, THROW, okay? So sometimes the question comes from these concepts. So this method 1 is calling or invoking method 2. So if the exception occur, so this exception will be returned back to method 1, right? So that's what the main idea is. So this method 2 is not responsible for handling the exception. The method 2 in this case is responsible for just throwing the exception back to method 1. So method 1 is basically handling the exception. So you have here try and catch here, right? So you are saying try this, if any exception occur, by method 2, return it to method 1, and the method 1 will basically handle it. Okay? Alright, so these things we discussed in the last class, and also we discussed that how we will basically let the user keep entering the data if there are any exception while entering the data. So while entering the data, if the exception occur, no problem, because you can use this logic. You have a variable here, continue input is equal to true. So that means what you want to repeat this whole code for infinite time, right? And what you have done here, you said that continue input is equal to false here, the last statement of the try. And why we are doing this? Because we know that if there is no exception, then this will execute, right? But if there is any exception, for example, exception will be in this line. So in this whole program, the chances of exception are here, where the user is entering that number, right? So here he might enter a character or something else. So the chances of exceptions are in this line. So once the exception occur here in this line, all these lines of code, you see here, all these 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. So all these lines will not be executed. So this continue input will be true because it is true in the loop. So that's what we basically do, in case of like exception occur while the user is entering the data because of that reason. Because we have the resources, we know that, okay, we can continue. But if the same is like you are reading this from a file and the file is not exist, for example, in that case you cannot continue. You will not say do while okay keep reading till the file is there, and every time file will not be there. You understand the point? So that you have to decide when the exception occur whether you can continue or not. So based on different circumstances that you have in your hand, you have to decide whether I can continue it or I can just give a message and my program will close. Okay, so these things are important for you to learn. So any question from these concepts, because now I'm going to discuss about the checked, unchecked exception, very important concept. Any question? Because this is what I have just discussed is the last class, right? So in the last class I discussed these things. So if you have any sawal from what we just discussed, any question, anything not clear, you ask. Yes, Mr.
What's the use of line catch?
Last class present or not present?
No.
Not present. So see, that's the problem.
I have an exam.
Same time.
Same time.
But that was in on Monday, right? Not on Wednesday.
No, not tomorrow.
Yeah, so Wednesday you missed. Monday because of the exam you did not give. And then on Wednesday, I don't know why you did not show up. So you missed the whole week. So my dear, I discussed this. What we do here, we are trying to learn exception handling. So what we do, we use something called try and catch. So we are saying, okay, try this block of code, and if the exception occur, go to the catch. Okay, what are exceptions? Are runtime errors. We discussed this already. I cannot repeat everything. So while your program is running, there can be possibilities of having exception. For example, here you are asking user to enter a number, but suppose he entered a string or anything else. So your program will crash to this line. So I don't want my program to crash. I want my program to safely or gracefully exit. So what I do, I say, okay, if there is an exception, go to the catch. So it will go here. If someone enter wrong data, instead of integer, someone enter double or something else. So it will go from here to directly to the catch. It will not execute these lines of code. And then whatever you have written here, it will execute. So that's what we do with the try and catch. Okay? And then there are so many concepts. So you better come to my office. I will give you those things. Okay, so try to go through these things in your home. If you are not able to understand, please come to my office. So I will explain it. Anyway, so now let's continue this. So this family, if you see this family, so this family gives you like an overview. Of course, there are like big classes that are not shown here. Only a part of the family is shown here. So you see that it's written many more classes here. So if you see this throwable is a subclass of object, and then the throwable has two subclasses, exception and error. Now this family, error and linkage error, virtual machine error, and so on. Now this is an exception or certain situation that occurs because of certain things in the system. So something that is related to the system. What is the meaning of that? The meaning is, for example, when you run your program, you need Java virtual machine, right? You need, for example, linker, and so many things are there in the background that you need. Okay. Now, if there are some problems in those programs, then your program will not run, right? So that is related to system. For example, the memory, you don't have enough memory, for example. Okay. So this type of error will occur. Okay. Now this is not related to your program, but this is related to the system. Okay. So even if there is some problem in the system, your program will not work. Suppose JVM does not work, Java virtual machine does not work, some problem there, linker does not work, so your program will also not work. So this type of error and its subclasses like this, if this occurs, your program cannot continue. So you have to just give a message and that's it, because there is no way you can continue. You understand the point? Now, here is the another family, which is exception, and all these subclasses and then the subclasses here. So we know some of them. Like for example, runtime exception, we know them. Arithmetic exception, we have just seen. Null pointer exception, I hope you have seen this one also in your code when you are writing it. Index out of bound exception, we know that already. Illegal argument exception also there. So this is a kind of family you see here, which basically generates by the runtime exception, and you have some other families here. So let's try to see this. So we have like system errors are thrown by JVM and represented in the error class. So error class describe internal system errors. So they are like rarely they will occur, not like every time they will occur, but there are chances. Okay, and you don't have any control of it. So if this type of problem occurs in your application, for example, while your application is running, so you have to simply give a message and your program should exit. So this is what you can do. But this type of exceptions, when it occurs, there are like reasons are what, like suppose as I have mentioned to you, like when we are entering the data, because of that the exception occur. When you are reading a file, IO exception occur. Okay, you give a wrong file name, for example, or the file is read only and you are trying to write. There can be different reasons for the exception. The file is read only and you try to write it, so exception will be thrown. You understand the point? You give a wrong file name, exception will be thrown. So there are like different possibilities of having the exception. So all those types of exceptions you handle by this family. Okay. Now runtime exception. Now this runtime exception is caused by programming errors, such as bad casting, access out of bound, numerical errors. We have seen this. So this runtime exception, mainly these families, all these, this will occur mainly because of bad programming. You don't follow the programming rule. Okay. Now other type of exception will be because of resources. The resources are not available. Okay. So you have two types of exception, checked and unchecked exception. Now very, very important concept. Listen carefully. So there are two categories of exception, checked and unchecked. Okay. So exceptions falls under the two category. Now what are those two categories? Let's have a look here. Now this is called unchecked exception. Who are unchecked? This family. Error, all the error and its subclasses, and runtime and its subclasses. They are known as unchecked exception. Now what is the meaning of that? So let me explain you with an example, because this is a very, very important concept, and sometimes in the exam they ask from these topics. Okay, so what we are trying to understand, the type of exception. So we have two categories of exception. one is called the checked exception and another one is what? Unchecked. Okay. Now in short, what are checked exceptions? Checked exceptions are the exceptions which Java will force you to use one of the technique. What are the technique? Either you use the try and catch or you throw the exception. Unchecked exception is the one which Java will not force you to use the exception handling. Okay? Okay, no problem. I know you are not able to understand, so let's take an example to understand. So let's give this the project name. Checked, unchecked. Okay, so this is our example, checked, unchecked exception. Okay, so let's say this one is unchecked. First try to understand the unchecked and then we say unchecked exception example. Somebody is opening the door here. Anyway, we don't have anything here. Okay, so let's try to write a simple program, very, very simple program. You all know this. So what we have here, so let's make it big. Very simple program. You already know this. What we are doing here, we are doing this. And suppose I'm new in array. So what I have done, I said something like this. Okay? So what I have done, simple program, right? Yes. So what do you think? My program will work? It will run? Or any problem I have?
Then pointer exception.
Yes, sir.
Array out of one.
Hmm. Any problem here or no problem?
We don't have the index for.
We don't have index file. So this is called like bad programming, right? Or we are like, we don't know how the arrays work in Java. So here Java is forcing you to use try and catch? Java is forcing you? No. So this is known as runtime exception, where Java does not force you. You know that exception is there. When I run the program, exception will be straight away, it will throw. So when I run the program, because I'm confused with this logic that 4 means that location 4 is there. Suppose I know like this. So when I write the program, my program will crash, right? So this is known as like checked, unchecked exception, because Java is not forcing you here. Okay? And same like other example. So if I say, for example, integer y, y equal to 4 divided by 0. Now this is another exception which we know, but Java is not forcing you. Java is saying, okay, you don't want to use exception handling, no problem, run the program. Java is not forcing you, right? So when I run the program, my program will crash, right? So my program will crash to this line, and suppose I fix this, I say, okay, this is 3, but again, in line number 6, my program will crash, right? So line number 6, the program crash, arithmetic exception. So what we are trying to understand here, that these kind of exceptions, they are called unchecked, because they are the family of runtime exception. Arithmetic exception, null pointer, index out of bound. So Java does not force you to either use try and catch or throw the exception. So these type of exceptions, or the code what you write, it is basically unchecked exception. Now let's take another example. So let's say this is checked exception example. Okay, so let's try to see this code. Same code what we have. So now suppose we are writing another simple program which you already know. So I'm saying file is equal to new file, and then I give a name, a.txt. So now I'm trying to use a resource, a Java resource. That means I'm trying to use a file here, right? So and then I say, for example, scanner or print writer, whatever you want to write or you want to read, depends on you. So say scanner something equal to new scanner, right? And then you are saying file. Of course, the error is for the import. So the moment you put an import, now Java stop you. Java stop you. Java is now waiting for you to do one of the things. Either you throw it, throw means the method, this method must throw an exception. So using the throws, you will throw the exception, or you put here try and catch. Why? Because this is a checked exception. Now what is the meaning of that? The meaning is you are here in this family, you are not in this family. This family is like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, index out of bound, illegal argument, like this. Now anything else, one second. Anything else, they don't give that. Anyway, so the anything else like IO exception, SQL exception, servlet based exception, so you can do like in Java, it's not like just you write class and object. There are so many things you can do in Java, right? You can write server based application, you can write database application, you will write swing graphical application. So there are so many things you do in Java. So those type of application when you are developing it, so Java will not allow you to write like how you have written this code here. Okay? So Java will not allow you. For these small, like these type of code, okay, Java will not force you. But of course, you have to use the exception handling here also, right? Because otherwise my program will crash. So, but in certain situation, like when you are using the file, or when I am using the SQL database connectivity, or if I am using server-based application, I'm writing servlets, all these. So those type of application, I have to handle my code, or I have to throw the exception, right? So that basically is known as the checked exception. So what we understand here, that the whole family of this exception are divided into two categories, checked and unchecked. So unchecked means where Java will not force you to use one of the technique, try and catch or throw. It's up to you. But again, of course, we don't want to be feel embarrassed in front of our client, right? So we have to handle the exception, or we have to throw the exception. So IO exception, class not found exception, and there are many families like that. So they are all called checked exception. So only these two families are unchecked, and rest of them are checked exception. So you have to basically either use the try and catch, or you have to throw the exception. Is this clear, the two concepts? Or any sawal? Any doubt in your mind? Okay, so in this case, for example, when I'm writing this program, so I will choose one of the option. You see here, he gives me the option. So surrounded by try and catch, or surrounded by throw, or add throw clause. So when I say add throw clause, it will just throw the type of exception that are possible here, right? So what is the type of exception? File not found exception. So this will be thrown. So if the file, this is the file which I'm, so now you see here when I run the program, this will throw an exception, file not found exception. See here, file not found exception is thrown. Because nobody is handling it, that's why you get this crash, right? But this is throwing the exception. So someone has to handle it, right? So basically, what you need to do is, especially in these type of cases, what you need to do is you have to say, okay, I want to surround it by try and catch. So what it does here, so it surrounded all these code with the try and catch. Okay, so it says, okay, try this statement, and if there is an exception occur, go to the catch. Now, important thing is, because you are using a file, so file not found exception will be occurred if it occurs. But if something else occur, then again your program will crash, right? So we discussed this in the last class, if you remember. So what you need to do is the last catch must be always the exception. So if something else goes down to my code, then this will take care of that. because it is the super class for all the exception, right? So this you have to always put it as the last exception catch clause of your code, right? For any other happening in your code. So this is what you need to do to basically use the exception handling in your code. Now let's try to continue from here. So they explain you that basically handling model, so exception handling model is based on 3 operations: declaring an exception, throwing, and catching. So we have discussed this already. So you have a method here. This method declares that there might be an exception. Okay, so you declare it, and then the second step is throwing it. So this method must throw it. So this is what you are doing. You are throwing the exception here based on this condition. So if the error occurred, then you are throwing the exception. And where it throws, it depends on who is calling this method. So in this program, if you see these 2 boxes, method 1 is calling the method 2, right? So this is try invoke method 2. So the exception will be returned back here. And because it is the same exception, so that's why the catch will basically process it. Okay, so this is the main idea of exception handling model. So you have 3 things here: declaring the exception, throwing the exception, and catching the exception. And I have already given you an example of this. Now if I have multiple possibilities, multiple chances of having an exception in a method, so I can give those possibilities by separating comma. So for example, if you have a method here, my method, and there are chances of IO exception and other exception, because I'm doing the file input output, I'm doing the array, I'm doing some calculation. So all these things I'm doing. So I have to mention all these things with the throw clause. Okay, so I will say throws IO exception, comma, arrays index out of bound exception, comma, arithmetic exception. So depend on what type of exception occur, it will throw it back. But it will not throw all together, because exception will not occur all together, right? Because in Java the statements are executed line by line. So if you have IO exception, if you have input mismatch exception, or if you have arithmetic exception, these might occur based on the line of code which is executing by your interpreter, right? So that's what the meaning here is. Now I think I showed you this also, right, in the last class, that you can throw an exception like this, or you can create first the object of an exception and then throw it. So both are same. So it's up to you the way you basically feel easy for understanding purpose. Okay, so I can create an exception and throw it straight away like this, or I first create an object and then throw it by this 2 steps. So either I can use the 1 step like this, or I can follow the 2 steps as you can see here in the slide. Okay, and this is another very good example here. So if you see this, we are writing a method called setRadius. Now this method takes a radius and do something, right? And we know that if the radius is negative, it means it is like an illegal argument. Illegal argument means what? The value which you give is an illegal. So if you are calculating the area of a circle, so radius you cannot take as a negative. Radius must be always positive. So this is the logic what you can do. You can say if the radius is greater than or equal to 0, it's fine, take it as a radius. Otherwise, throw new illegal argument exception. And this is the message: radius cannot be negative. This message will be returned with the object. Which object? Illegal argument exception. So this error will be generated here, and the object will be thrown back to who? To the one who is calling it. Okay. So these things are very important. So I already showed you this. So if you have, of course, multiple catch, so you will write like this, try this, and then catch like this. So you will keep going on. Depend on how big is your code or how many types of exception there are chances for this code to generate. Now try to be more close to the exception. Okay, the last catch must be the exception. the superclass. But these must be the more close, exceptions that are possibilities of having in your code. Okay, now this is again a very good example here. It says here, so for example, you have a method called main is calling this method is calling this method. So they have given a good example here for us to understand. Let's try to see this example here. Okay, so let's try to take this whole example in our Java and see what's going on here. Then we will understand this. Okay, so let's create a program here. What is the name of this? They did not give. Anyway, so I will just give a name. Something like exception trace. Exception trace. Now these type of questions sometimes comes in the exam. So make sure you have a good understanding of what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so this is our program. And, okay. So this is a set of programs that what we have. Okay. So what will be the output of this? This is what they are asking you to. Of course, you need to put it in one line, in one page. It's not possible, right? So what you have a main here. Okay, so you have a main. You see here main. So you have a main. Main has a method m. And m has another method called m2. And m2 has another called m3. Okay, so they are saying, okay, what will be the output of this program when you run? So when you run this, what will be the output of this program? So how you will basically trace this? Okay, so let's try to trace. So what is happening here? Your program start executing from the main, right?
Yes.
So it calls M1. M1 calls M2. So M2 is called. So you are here now. Now M2 calls M3. So you are here, M3. And M3 does what? It throws an illegal argument exception. So this exception it generates and it throws. Where it will throw? Where it will throw?
To the
M2,
one
right? So the one who is calling, so it will throw it here. So when it throws it here, what it throws, what it gives.
illegal form.
So this message is returned back here, right? So what will happen to your code? What will happen to your code?
Illegal one, and the next line is 5.
So illegal wrong. Why? Because the exception occur here. So this line is not executing properly, right? So this line will not execute. So as this line will not execute. So what he will do? He will jump to the catch. It will check whether the exception is of same type. Yes, it is of same type, right? Same type. So it will go to this and e.get message. What is get message? This is the message which you will receive. Illegal, wrong. This will come here. And after that, it will come out. So when it is coming out of the try block, it finds this, right? So this will be printed, okay? So after that, what will happen? After that, what will happen? After that, because who calls M2? Because M2 does not throw any exception. So this exception is handled here, okay? So M2 completes its job, then it will come here and it will print S3. And then after doing that, it will print S4 because it does not go here, right? And in the same way, uh, so that means this ends, and then it comes here because this ends, so it will print S1, right? So let's run and see what it does. So see here, uh, it prints first of all illegal, illegal wrong, right? Illegal wrong it prints. Why? Because of this this message what it receives, it prints this, and then it prints S6. So that means this process ends. Then what happens? It prints S3. This line will be printed. It does not go here. Then it comes here because it comes out of the try block. So so this catch does not go here. Why? Because the exception is already handled here. So it prints S4. So after S3, S4 is printed, and then so this M1 is executed. Then it comes here and it prints S1, and then it prints S2. Okay. All right. Now I know some of you are not able to understand, so I have to go to the board to explain. Yes, I will go to the board to explain. I will trace it on the board. So I will trace it on the board, so it will be easy for you to understand. Yes, your sawal. What you are trying to ask? Please ask your question.
If M2 throws an exception,
You power up. Anyway, so I will try to see the code from here.
You want to see the code?
Anyway, no problem. So I will just trace it from here. So what we have here, we have a main here. This is the main. Okay, and then you have something like try here, and here you have M1, right? And then so the code is there. Okay, and then what you have M1. Okay, and M1 is calling something like a try. Then you have M2 here, and you have a catch. All these things are here. Okay, so and then you have M2 and M2 is calling M3. So inside this you have try M3, right? And then you have a catch. Lastly is M3 is here. This is M3, right? This is M3. Yes. So M3, inside M3 you are saying throw new illegal blah blah blah. Okay. And then you have a message here. The message says illegally wrong, something like this. Illegally wrong. Fine. So this is what you are doing. So what's going on? So your basically programs jumps to M1, and because of this, your program jumps to M2, and then because of this, your program jumps to M3, and it start executing M3. Fine. Exception occurred because of this line. The exception occurred, so it returns the message. It returns what? E. Suppose E is the object, right? So E is an object, so it returns E, and with this illegally, this is the message which it brings it back, illegally wrong. So this is inside the object, so it returns it here. So your try block has an exception here, right? So now, of course, because of this line, and you have something here to print the whole code. If you open it, so maybe we can trace it. If you just please open it. So you are controlling with the mobile. That's good. Okay. Okay, so this is our code. Now I think it will be much better to understand. Come on. So we are here, right? So this is what happened. Your main start executing it. So the main see the M1 method call, so it jumps to M1. Okay, so what's going on in the code? When you run the program, your program start running from here, right? The main will execute. So this is a method called M1. So it goes to M1 here. So we are here in this box, right? And then inside this you have M2 and then system out something. So M2, that means it jumps to M2. So this is your method M2. So it's here M2, and then inside you have M3. Okay, another method call. So M3, you see here. So this is our M3. So it jumps to M3. So this is your box. The last box is your M3, right? So this is your M3. Now what you have done in M3? You created an exception here, illegal argument exception. So your program, basically this method throws the exception. Now where it throws, of course it throws to M2, right? Because M2 is calling it. So the exception comes here. So that means what? The try block will now to this line, this line here. This line will not execute. Okay, so this line and this line will not execute, right? Because the exception occurred. So it will go to the cache, fine. When it goes to the cache, it will print the e.get message. What you are saying? You are saying e.get message. So what is e? E is the object which it receives, and this is the message what. So that's why the first result what you get is illegal wrong, illegal or illegally wrong, whatever it is. Fine. So this is the first message what I receive. Now after that, you see here the try block starts here and ends here, right? Catch and so this will execute also. Okay, so this will execute. So S6 will be printed next. So that means what? M2 handle the exception, the story ends. Okay, so this completes. This process completes. So that means what? It will return M2, you already processed it. What is remaining is this, right? So S3 will be printed next because this is already handled the exception there. So S3 will be printed. It will not go here because the exceptions are already you handled it there, and then so it will not come to this line, right? So after that, what happens? This is the last line what we have. So S4 will be printed. So what you are doing? You process basically M2. So M2 already processed it. So it will go back to where? So that means what? If you see the boxes we draw, so once it processed, it will be back here, right? And after that, it will be back to this line. So now we are to the last stage. So for the last stage, you are here, right? I hope you are able to see this. I have drawn the lines. So anyway, so this is the last statement that will be printed, S1. So it will print S1. It will not go to the cache. And of course, we have this also. So S2 will be printed. So this is the way how, okay, now your question. The thing is, I'm going to give you another example, very similar like this, then it will be more interesting. Yes?
If we want M2 to throw an exception, what should we do? Should we write public static void M2 throw, or we just write the statement inside M2?
Yes, if you want, like for example, M2 to throw an exception. So for example, here in this line, you want M2 to throw an exception.
The same.
Yeah, same like this. So what you need to do here, first step is you need to write this. Okay, you need to write this. Okay.
No, the same exception in M3.
Yeah.
Throw it to N2, then M2 throw it to N1.
Okay. I understand. So okay. 1 second. Let me just. I understand your question. Just 1 second. One second. Actually, because they modified this, so we have. I have another very good example for you to understand. This is. I hope after this you will understand. Let me go back to the previous semester. let's say somewhere here, somewhere here. There is 2 or 3 merge, 2 or 3 merge, 2 or 3 merge, 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 merge. This one. Now it will be more interesting. Okay, so let's try to see this code to make it more interesting. Okay, so let's try to see a very interesting example for our understanding. This example. This is easy and easy to digest, easy to understand. That was also easy. So this one is more easy. I hope this one all of you will be able to answer if you understand, of course, ABC. So I think maybe I did not copy all of it. Okay, so this is your code. Just move it. I hope this is visible to everyone. Maybe make it big. Okay, I'm just moving it up to here. So now tell me what is the answer. This is more interesting. What answer you will get? Think about it. 1 minute of time I'm giving you. These type of problems generally they ask in the exam. So we have a name. Say try. A, B. Then we are saying catch. This is the name. And then you have A. A. This is C. This is C. And you have a D also, right? No. No. ABC. Okay, good. So you have. Okay. We have Y. And you have a C here. And you are throwing exception. Throw. Exception. Yes, sir. What do you think?
Maybe in the first line in A and C is
So this type of question generally comes in the exam.
In A.
in A, C is expansion.
E. What's to string?
Huh?
To string of E
Tool string?
in line 16.
E is just, of course, the message what it is coming. C is exception, this is the message.
NA, C is exceptional. NA is C is exceptional. Twice.
So that's what we need to understand. Okay, so let's try to trace this. So what is the first call? This is the first call, right?
Yeah.
So this line jumps your code from here to here, right? And then what you have, the try block is there, and you have B. That means what? From here you are jumping to the B. Fine? So you are now in method B. This is the method B. But method B says if there is any exception, I will throw it to whom? Whoever called me. Okay? So the method B calls C, and C says the same thing, that if the exception occur, I will throw the exception to the one who calls me. Clear? So C is basically called by who? B, right? Who is calling C? Is the B. Who is calling C is the B. So what is happening? Exception occurred. Where it is occurred? In the C block, the exception occurred. Now what is the message of the exception? C is exception. So this message will be thrown where? It will be thrown to the B, right? Because who calls C? The B. So this exception will be returned here, right? So this exception E will be returned with this message. Now B will throw the exception where? It will throw the exception to the A. So the exception is returned to C, and because of this, C will throw the exception to the A, because who calls B? A. So it will throw the exception to A. Now here you have a try, right? So what will happen? Exception occurred here. Up to this point, nothing is printed, right? Now exception occurred here, so it will go to the cache. It will check the exception. Yes, the exception is occurred. What is the type? Exception. Both are same. Yes, it is same. Then it will go to the cache. And what is this output? In A dot dot dot. So this is the first output what you will get. In A dot dot dot. This is the first output that you get. And then system dot out println E. What is this E? E is this message. So C is exception. This message you will get. And here, because you already handled the exception, this is the important. You already handled the exception, so the story ends here. Okay? So that means you already process A. So A completes its process. Then B will start executing it because you already processed the exception. B. Now what? Who is calling or which method is calling B? Is the main. So now it will directly jump to B. It is not taking care of A. That's the important point. So from B it will jump to from the main it will jump to B, and then the same thing. Here you have C. Exception will be thrown, so this will be written here, and from here it will go where? It will go to the main. Excellent. So it will go to the main here. Okay. So exception, and what is the message? This is the message what will return. Now exception occurred, same type. Yes, it is same type. So it will go inside the cache block, and this will be printed in main again. In main dot dot dot, and then C is the exception. C is exception. So this is the actual flow how the code will basically execute. So let's run this. Of course, that you don't need to worry about lang and that exception. So in A, C is exception, in main, and C is exception. Okay. Of course, this is the extra message what you are getting from the get message. But the important thing is you get in A, C is exception, and then in main, and then C is exception. Any question? Because I'm going to give you the next very challenging problem based on this concept. Any question, anything which is not clear, you lost somewhere, anyone who is not able to understand how these methods or these messages are printed, how these methods communicate. Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Saud. You have some doubt?
That's okay.
It's okay? Sure? Yes, Mr. Bandar?
If the exception is true, when he go to the try and he say B, he will move from try to the catch.
Yes, yes, because the same type of exception occur. You see that? The exception is same type, right? Exception. And you have in the catch the same type, so it will go to the catch. Right? Now, based on this, let's try to see the next problem. Based on this. Now, you have to practice these type of problems, because these type of problems sometimes they ask in the exam. Now, this is again a very challenging one. If you have solved this one, then that means you understand that. Okay, so we just give any name, no problem. So let's just do this. ABC, forget about ABC. Okay, so I have to put it in one page. That's another. So this is your main. Okay, so this is how it looks like. So what I will do, I will just move this here, something like this, so that it comes in one page. Yeah, it comes in one page. So I hope you understand what we are doing. Okay, same thing for C. Maybe I will just move this one also like this. Now it is fine, right? Okay, so let's move. Let it be like this, because then you will confuse. I'm just moving these curly brackets up. So this is the whole flow of your program. I hope it is clear. So this is what it looks like. So you have here, how I can make it big? Any help? Full screen? Is there any way to make it full screen view? Full screen. Yeah. Now it is much better, right? Yeah. Okay, sir. Now, so I can just organize. Which one makes you confused? Now I think everything is okay. There should not be any problem now. Okay, sir. So take your time. 1 or 2 minutes of time. 2 minutes of time. Have a look. That is why bringing the paper, pencil is very important, because this type of code you cannot do it by your mind, very difficult. Imagine this comes in the exam, what you will do? So in the exam you have pencil, paper, right? So you can trace it, but here nobody brings pencil, paper, only Faisal is there. Faisal has pencil. You don't have pencil, right? Just anyway, so try to think what is the answer, how the things goes. What will be the possible output? Anyone
Wait.
has? Wait. Okay. Wait. Yes, sir. What are the answers?
The first line C is expression.
First line, C is exception. Okay,
Yes.
C is exception.
The second line B is even more expression.
B is even more exception. Okay. Yes.
Third in A.
In A. Next line is in A. Okay, in A.
And C is expression.
C is exception.
Yes.
Okay.
And another C is
C is another C is exception.
yes.
Okay.
And B is even.
B is even more exception.
And the last one C is expression.
C is exception. Okay, so yes, Ali, what is your answer?
C is exceptional.
C is exception.
In A,
In A. Okay.
B is even more.
B is even more, no problem. Yes, next.
C is exceptional.
C is exception.
Again,
Okay, so you have
B
something.
is even more.
So, okay, let's try to trace it. No problem. Again, the important point here is you have to see like error occurred where. Okay, where is the exception occurred and what happens then? So your program start executing it, right? So it starts from here, main. Then immediately the program has A, right? So it will jump to A. So where is the A? A is here.
B.
Okay, so now you have B here. So B, it is here. Now B says what? B says it will throw an exception. Fine, good. Then B start executing it. B, see this code C, that means you are calling C. So it comes here, C. So C says I will throw an exception. So C got an exception, right? And this is the message. So where it will throw the exception? Where?
In the B.
In the B or in the A?
No, in the B.
In the B, right? Because B is calling C. So it will throw the exception here, right? So exception is returned here. So it will go to the cache. It will check the exception type. Yes, it is the same type. So it will come here and then it prints. What it prints? It prints this message. C is exception. And some other message, no problem. But the main thing is C is exception will be printed. C is exception. So this is correct, right? C is exception will be printed. Now after printing it, what you are doing here? This is important. You are generating an exception, right? Same like here, you are generating an exception. But the exception has a different message here. B is even more except. So where this exception will be thrown?
In the B.
Where it will be thrown?
A.
It will throw to the A, right? Because who calls B is the A. So this exception, B is even more exception will be thrown here. So same thing will happen. Type of exception is exception. Yes, it is exception. So it will come here. And then it will print in A dot dot dot. Because here you have in A dot dot dot, the first thing. So in A dot 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 will be printed here. Fine. And after that, E. What is E? E is not this. E is B. So this will be printed. So B is even more exception will be printed. Okay, so after that what will happen? The story ends here, right? So the story ends here because you already handled it. So your program will return here to this line. The program will return here to this line. Now this is the challenge, most important thing. So your method B will execute. Why? Because the exception already handled here. So the B start executing now. So B is calling what?
B.
It is calling, yani the main method is calling B. So it will come here. So now there is no relationship with the A. So B calls C. Same thing. Exception occur. This message will be returned to B.
He gives message.
And B will do what? He will print C is an exception. So C is an exception will be printed. And after that, what will happen? The exception is generated. Where this exception will be thrown? To the A or to the main?
Main.
To the main. That's the important because B, main calls the B. In the second statement, main calls the B. So this exception will be returned back to basically the main. So now the exception occurred to this line. So what is the meaning? This line will not execute, so as this line will not execute. So these two lines will not execute. So the exception, it will come here, right? And then it will print in main. So in main will be printed. And then finally the last thing is E, which is your B is even more exception. B is even more exception will be printed. Now what we understand? We understand that this C method will not be executed. Why? Because the program crashed to this line. So program crashed to this line, it means this line will not execute, this line will not execute. So it goes to the cache of it and then it just do whatever you have written in the cache and that's it. Your program basically terminates gracefully. So C will not execute. So if you don't have a clear understanding, so after executing B, then you will come to the C and you will say, this is also a message that you will get back here. So what is important, what we learned by this example is that how the methods are returning the exception, how they are throwing the exception. Based on that, whether you are handling it or not, depends on that, your code will continue. So in case of the first, when the B returns the exception, A was handling it. So it handles the exception and the story ends here. So that's why B will continue. Okay? But if it does not handle the exception, for example, so it throws back here. So if it throws back the exception here to handle it in the main, so then neither this will execute, nor this will execute, nor this will execute. In case if suppose A also throw the exception to the main. You understand the point? So who is throwing it, who is handling it, that's very important for you to understand and implement it properly when you are writing these applications. Okay, so in this example, if I do the same thing, for example, I said throw new exception here and I mention it that this will throw it. So even the method B throw the exception to A and A will throw it to the main. So that means this will not execute, right? Because A is your first statement and in the first statement you got an exception. So nothing will be executed. So it will just execute this and that's it. So let's run this and see whether we get the correct result or not. So you see here, C is exception in A, B is even more exception, C is exception in main, and then B is even more exception. Okay, now there is another example they have given you. Now these examples are very interesting. So let's go to the view. So there is another example here, which basically now, so tell me what is the output of this very quickly, we are running out of time. can try this in your home. I will upload this slide. But of course, the tracing is important. The important thing is, see, the code is very similar, like what we have just discussed. But when you trace it based on the output, based on the result, you will get different results. So here you see I put a commit here, I put system out, and then I try to show you. So just try to do these all we are just running out of time, it's already 7 minutes left. So just try this. I will upload these examples now, and make sure you understand. Okay, so in the next class, so this is what they explain you. They give you another example here. So you can just copy paste this and try to trace it. Make sure don't run it. First trace it as I just trace it in front of you. Why? Because in the exam you will not have the Java there, right? So you have to trace it as I just showed you. So if you want to really practice it, make sure you do it as I showed you. Okay, so understand, and if it comes in the exam, you can easily answer it. And then we will try to understand the other concept that what we have. Mainly we covered most of the things of the exception. Of course, there are some new things we will learn in the next class, okay? The finally clause is there, and then we need to see the assertion and some other concepts. So we will see what is finally clause and why we use it, and in the new exception handling ways, try with resource clause, we don't use the finally. But anyway, it is there in the slide, so we will discuss what is the purpose of finally and how to use it. So these things we will discuss in the next class, okay? And then we will also try to use the custom exception, we can create our own exception class, okay? So there are certain exceptions that are in the Java, but if we want to create our own exception class, how we can do that, okay? So we will discuss those things in the next class, inshallah. Okay, so let me just upload this. I think the blackboard is there, so